It was the middle of a humid July evening when the house I had called home for nearly 2 decades closed its doors to me for the final time. I stood there, suitcase in hand, as the front porch light flickered faintly. My 3 children were nowhere to be seen, and the man I once called my husband had disappeared into the shadows of the hallway. The last words he said still rang in my ears. "You need to leave. There's no place for you here anymore." The silence after the door slammed was deafening. The cicadas buzzed in the trees as I stood motionless, unable to comprehend what had just happened. My throat burned from the argument that had erupted only moments earlier. My pleas, my tears, my promises to fix things. All of it had fallen on deaf ears. I turned away from the house with shaking hands and began walking, though I had no idea where I was going. I had no money, no car, and nowhere to stay. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my eldest daughter, Sarah. "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't help you right now." It felt like a final nail in the coffin. My children had sided with him. The man who had always been calm, measured, and calculating in his words had convinced them that I was the one to blame. As I walked down the street, the full moon hung heavy in the sky, illuminating my path in a way that felt almost cruel. I passed familiar houses, landmarks of a life that now felt like someone else's. Every step forward was like pulling myself out of quicksand, slow, exhausting, and terrifying. But I wasn't ready to give up just yet. The streets were eerily quiet as I kept walking, the weight of my suitcase dragging me down both physically and emotionally. I kept thinking, how did it come to this? My mind replayed the argument over and over, searching for a moment where I might have changed the outcome. It had started earlier that evening. I had come home from running errands to find Michael, my husband, sitting in the living room with a steely expression. The kids were in their rooms, their doors shut tight, as if they already knew what was about to unfold. "Sit down," Michael had said, his tone cold, unfamiliar. I sat across from him, the space between us suddenly feeling like a chasm. The words that followed hit me like a series of sharp blows. He spoke of trust, of betrayal, of choices he couldn't forgive. My heart raced as he explained how he discovered the messages I thought I had erased, the secrets I thought I had buried. "I tried," he said, his voice breaking for just a moment. "But I can't look at you the same way anymore." I begged him to reconsider, my voice cracking as I pleaded for another chance. I promised to fix things, to repair the damage I had caused. But he remained resolute, his decision final. The children had stayed upstairs, silent witnesses to the unraveling of their family. I had hoped one of them would come down, would stand by my side, but they didn't. When Michael finally told me to leave, his voice was devoid of anger, just a quiet, painful certainty. Now, as I wandered aimlessly, I realized I couldn't even be angry at him. He had every right to feel the way he did. The choices I made, the ones that led us here, were mine alone. Still, it hurt more than I thought it would. I spotted a bench near the corner of a small park and collapsed onto it, my legs trembling beneath me. The night air was warm, but I shivered as a breeze rustled through the trees. I felt utterly alone. As I sat there staring into the darkness, a car passed by, its headlights briefly illuminating my tear-streaked face. I turned away, ashamed of the broken reflection I saw in the window. I tried to focus on my next steps. Where could I go? I had no close friends to turn to, not anymore. The distance I'd put between myself and the people who cared about me was now a barrier I didn't know how to cross. The park was empty, save for the occasional sound of rustling leaves. In the stillness, I found myself thinking back to the days when things were simpler. Before the choices I made, before the lies, before everything fell apart. I tried to remember the last time I truly felt like myself, but the memory was elusive, like a shadow slipping through my fingers. I checked my phone again, hoping for some kind of message, an apology, a sign of forgiveness, anything. But there was nothing. My battery was nearly dead. And with it, the thin thread of connection to the life I had lost. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what it felt like to have nothing. I stayed on the park bench until the first streaks of dawn painted the sky. I hadn't slept. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Michael's face, his disappointment, his anger, and the way my children wouldn't even look at me as I left. I needed to figure something out, and fast. My phone battery was at 5%, so I decided to make one last call before it died. I scrolled through my contacts, hesitating over each name, unsure who might even answer. Finally, I landed on Claire. Claire and I had been close once. She was my best friend for years before life pulled us in different directions. We hadn't spoken much recently, but she was kind-hearted, and I prayed that kindness still extended to me. The phone rang twice before she answered, her voice groggy but familiar. "Hello. Claire, it's me," I said, my voice trembling. There was a pause. "Oh, hi Rachel. It's been a while. Are you okay?" I nearly broke down at the warmth in her voice. "Not really. My voice cracked and I had to take a moment to compose myself. I need somewhere to stay. Just for a night or two. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't." "Of course," she interrupted. "Where are you? I'll come get you." Her response was so immediate, so unconditional, that it brought fresh tears to my eyes. I gave her my location and within 20 minutes, she pulled up in her old green sedan. Her hair still messy from sleep and a concerned look on her face. She didn't ask questions as I climbed into the passenger seat, just handed me a bottle of water and a granola bar. "You look like you need this," she said with a small smile. "Thank you," I murmured, clutching the water like it was a lifeline. The drive to her apartment was quiet, the kind of silence that feels safe, not oppressive. When we arrived, she led me to her spare bedroom, a small but cozy space with a neatly made bed and a window that overlooked a row of blooming hydrangeas. "Take a shower, get some rest," Claire said gently. "We'll talk when you're ready." I nodded, grateful beyond words, and locked myself in the bathroom. The hot water was a relief, washing away the grime of the night and some of the weight in my chest. As I dried off, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My reflection startled me. My eyes were puffy, my face pale, and my expression hollow. Who am I? I thought. The question felt heavier than it ever had before. After my shower, I collapsed onto the bed, exhaustion finally overtaking me. Claire had left a note on the nightstand. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me. Rest as long as you want." I lay there staring at the ceiling, a strange mixture of relief and dread swirling inside me. I had found temporary refuge, but I knew it wouldn't last. Eventually, I would have to face the full consequences of my actions, and the thought of it terrified me. As I drifted off to sleep, a memory surfaced, Michael holding my hand on our wedding day, his smile so full of hope and love. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the memory lingered, haunting me even in my dreams. When I woke up, the sunlight filtering through the curtains felt harsh, almost accusatory. It took me a moment to remember where I was, and when I did, the heaviness in my chest returned with a vengeance. Claire was in the kitchen when I emerged, her hair tied back and a cup of coffee in her hand. The smell of eggs and toast filled the air. She looked up and smiled softly, motioning for me to sit at the table. "I made breakfast," she said. "You look like you could use some." I sank into the chair, grateful for her kindness. "Thank you for all of this." She waved me off. "You do the same for me." I wasn't so sure. A pang of guilt rippled through me as I realized how distant I'd been from her for years. Claire sat across from me, studying my face carefully. "Do you want to talk about what happened?" I hesitated, my hands tightening around the mug of coffee she placed in front of me. I didn't know how to put everything into words without feeling like a villain in my own story. Finally, I took a deep breath. "Michael kicked me out," I said quietly. He found out about something I did. Something I regret more than anything." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. I had an affair," I admitted, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "It wasn't long. It wasn't even serious. But it was enough to destroy everything." Claire's expression softened, though there was a flicker of something else, perhaps disappointment or sadness. "Oh, Rachel. I don't know why I did it," I continued, my voice shaking. "Michael was a good husband, a great father, and I threw it all away for something that didn't mean anything. Now my kids hate me and I don't even blame them. I don't think I'll ever get them back." Claire reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "Rachel, I'm not going to tell you what you did was okay because it wasn't. But people make mistakes. That doesn't mean you can't try to make things right." "I don't even know where to start," I whispered. She leaned back in her chair, her brow furrowed in thought. "Start by being honest with yourself and with them. Apologize. Really apologize, not just with words but with actions. It's not going to be easy, and it might take a long time, but if you want to fix things you have to try." Her words hit me hard. I had spent so much time wallowing in self-pity that I hadn't thought about what it would take to begin making amends. I don't know if they'll ever forgive me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They might not, Claire said gently. But you won't know unless you try. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I stayed in Claire's apartment, trying to summon the courage to do what she'd said. Every time I picked up my phone, though, my hands trembled, and I couldn't bring myself to dial Michael's number, or send a message to Sarah or the others. That evening, as I sat staring at the blank screen of my phone, Claire joined me on the couch with 2 glasses of wine. I've been thinking, she said. Why don't you write them a letter? Sometimes it's easier to say what you need to on paper. You can take your time, choose your words carefully. I nodded slowly. Maybe that's a good idea. As I sat at the small desk in her living room that night, pen in hand, I realized just how much I had to say. I wanted to explain everything, to tell them how much I loved them, how sorry I was, and how much I wanted to earn their trust back. But the words didn't come easily. I wrote and rewrote the letter until my hand ached, pouring my heart onto the page. By the time I finished, the sun was beginning to rise, and my chest felt a little lighter. The letter sat on the desk, folded and addressed to Michael and the kids. I had read and reread it so many times that the words began to blur together, but it was as honest and heartfelt as I could make it. Now came the hardest part. Sending it. Claire offered to drop it off for me, but I knew I had to do this myself. I couldn't keep hiding behind others or running away. It was time to face the consequences, no matter how painful they might be. That afternoon, with the letter tucked into my bag, I borrowed Claire's car and drove to the house. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The closer I got, the more my stomach churned. When I pulled up outside, I noticed Michael's car in the driveway, along with Sarah's. My heart leapt into my throat. I wasn't sure if I wanted them to be home or not. The house looked exactly as it always had, yet it felt foreign to me now. I sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at the front door, trying to gather the courage to step out. Eventually, I took a deep breath, grabbed the letter and walked up to the porch. I knocked lightly, almost hoping no one would hear me. But the door opened and there stood Sarah, her expression a mixture of surprise and guardedness. "Mom," she said, her voice neutral. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, forcing a small smile. I wrote something for you. For all of you." I held out the letter, my hand trembling slightly. She hesitated before taking it, her eyes flicking to mine briefly before looking away. "I'll give it to Dad," she said. "Thank you," I said softly. I hope you'll read it too." She nodded but didn't say anything else. The silence between us was heavy, filled with everything that had gone unsaid since the night I left. Finally, she stepped back and closed the door. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door that had once been a symbol of warmth and family. Now it felt like a barrier I might never break through again. As I walked back to the car, tears welled up in my eyes. Part of me wanted to believe that the letter would make a difference, that it would be the first step toward healing. But another part of me feared it wouldn't matter, that the damage I had done was too great. When I returned to Claire's apartment, she greeted me with a reassuring smile. "How did it go?" "I gave them the letter," I said, sinking onto the couch. "Now I just have to wait." Claire sat beside me, offering a glass of water. "You did what you could, Rachel. The rest is up to them." The waiting was excruciating. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, but it was never the message I was hoping for. Days passed and I began to lose hope. Then one evening, just as I was about to give up, my phone lit up with a message from Michael. "We read your letter. Can we talk tomorrow? Just you and me." My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something, a chance. The next day, I arrived at a quiet cafe Michael had chosen for our meeting. I was nervous beyond words, my stomach in knots as I clutched my bag tightly. I arrived early and took a seat near the window, the sunlight streaming in as I tried to steady my breathing. When Michael walked in, his presence filled the room. He looked the same as always, calm, composed, but his expression was unreadable. He spotted me and approached the table, his steps measured and deliberate. "Rachel," he said, his voice polite but distant as he sat down across from me. "Michael," I replied softly, my throat tight. An awkward silence hung between us for a moment before he spoke. "I read your letter." "We all did." I nodded, unsure of what to say. His tone was measured, but there was an underlying edge of pain that made my chest ache. "Why now?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. "Why are you reaching out after everything that happened?" I swallowed hard. "Because I know I messed up, Michael. I know I hurt you and the kids, and I hate myself for it. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I had to try. I couldn't let things end the way they did." He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. "Do you even understand what you did to us? To our family? You broke something I don't know if we can ever fix." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "I do understand. I see it now more than ever. And if I could take it all back, I would. But I can't. All I can do is tell you how sorry I am and hope that maybe one day, you'll believe me." Michael exhaled deeply, his jaw tightening. "The kids are angry, Rachel. They feel abandoned. And honestly, so do I. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed all of us." Hearing those words out loud was like a dagger to the heart. But I nodded. "I know," I whispered. "And I hate myself for it every single day. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm here because I want to try to earn it, if you'll let me." He was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on the table. Finally, he looked up, his expression softer but still guarded. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Rachel. But for the sake of the kids, I'm willing to have this conversation. That's all I can promise right now." Relief and heartbreak washed over me in equal measure. It wasn't what I had hoped for, but it was more than I deserved. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right with them. I know it's going to take time, and I'm willing to wait as long as it takes." Michael nodded but didn't respond. We sat there in silence for a moment before he finally stood. "I'll talk to the kids. I'll let them decide how they want to handle this. But don't push them, Rachel. They're hurt and they need space." "I understand," I said softly, my heart heavy but grateful for even this small chance. He left the cafe without another word, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stared out the window, watching as he walked away, and I realized just how much work lay ahead of me. This wasn't the resolution I had hoped for, but it was a start. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. The following week was a blur of restless anticipation. I stayed at Claire's apartment, waiting for any word from Michael or the kids. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leapt, only to sink when it wasn't them. But then late one evening I got a message from Sarah. "Can we talk? Just us." I stared at the screen, rereading the message several times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. With trembling fingers I typed back, "Of course. Whenever you're ready." The next day, Sarah agreed to meet me at a small park near her college campus. I arrived early, my nerves in overdrive as I sat on a weathered wooden bench beneath an old oak tree. The autumn leaves rustled in the breeze, their golden hues a stark contrast to the heaviness I felt inside. When Sarah arrived, she looked older somehow, more serious than I remembered. She had always been my fiery, independent child, but now there was a guardedness in her eyes that broke my heart. "Hi," she said, standing a few feet away from me. "Hi," I replied, rising awkwardly to my feet. "Why though? Why did you do it? Wasn't our family enough for you?" Her question cut deeper than anything else, and I struggled to find the right words. "It wasn't about you, Sarah, or Dad, or anyone else. It was about me, and that's the hardest part to admit. I was unhappy with myself, with who I'd become. And instead of facing that and working on it, I made the worst decision of my life." She looked away, her jaw tightening. "You should have talked to us. Or to Dad. You didn't have to ruin everything." "You're right," I said, my voice shaking. "I should have. And I wish I could go back and do it differently. But I can't. All I can do is try to be better now." Sarah was silent for a long time, her eyes focused on a patch of grass in front of us. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet." My heart sank, but I nodded. "I understand. And I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I just want you to know that I'm here. And I'm not giving up on trying to fix this." She stood then, brushing her hands on her jeans. "I have to go. But maybe we can talk again. Sometime." I nodded quickly, hope flickering in my chest. "Whenever you're ready. I'll be here." She gave a small nod before walking away, leaving me alone on the bench. I sat there for a while, watching the leaves fall and feeling the tiniest bit of weight lift from my heart. It wasn't much, but it was a start. After Sarah agreed to talk again, I found myself clinging to that small sliver of hope. It wasn't much, but it was more than I thought I'd ever have. I began writing letters to Ethan and my youngest, Lily, even though I wasn't sure they'd read them. Each letter was a piece of my heart, an attempt to explain, to apologize, and to remind them how much I loved them. Days turned into weeks. Sarah and I met a few more times, each conversation tentative and heavy with unspoken emotions. She didn't forgive me outright, but she listened, and that alone felt like a miracle. Then one evening I got an unexpected call. It was Ethan. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice hesitant but warm. My breath caught in my throat. "Hi, Ethan. I didn't expect to hear from you. I got your letter," he said. "And I've been thinking about everything. It's just hard, you know." "I know," I said softly. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just want you to know how sorry I am, and how much I love you." There was a pause and I heard him exhale. "I believe you're sorry. I'm still angry and hurt. But Sarah said you've been trying, so I guess I wanted to see how you're doing." His words made my chest tighten. He was reaching out, even through his pain, and I couldn't have been prouder of the young man he'd become. "I'm doing better," I said honestly. "I've been going to therapy, trying to figure out how to be a better person. A better mom. I just want to fix what I can." He was quiet for a moment before saying, "I'm not ready to talk about everything yet, but maybe we can start slow. Like lunch or something." Tears filled my eyes. "I'd love that, Ethan. Just let me know when and where, and I'll be there." After we hung up, I sat on Claire's couch, clutching my phone to my chest. Two of my children had taken tentative steps toward me, and while the road ahead was still long, I felt a flicker of hope. Lily, however, remained silent. She hadn't replied to my letters or messages, and the distance between us was unbearable. I knew she was the most sensitive of my three kids, and I had hurt her deeply. One afternoon I decided to take a different approach. I drove to Lily's favorite bookstore, the one we used to visit together when she was younger, and picked out a novel I thought she'd love. I tucked a note inside the front cover, explaining that I missed her and hoped this book would remind her of the happy times we'd shared. That evening, I left the book on the porch of Michael's house. I didn't ring the bell or knock. I just placed it carefully by the door and walked away. A few days later I got a text from her. It was short and simple. "Thanks for the book." My heart swelled. It wasn't much, but it was something. Weeks turned into months, and though progress with my children was slow, it was steady. Sarah and I spoke regularly, Ethan and I had met for lunch twice, and even Lily had begun responding to my messages, though she remained distant. Each small step felt like a victory, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost everything. But there was one thing I couldn't shake. A lingering question that had haunted me since the day Michael told me to leave. Why had he reacted so decisively, so unshakably, when he'd found out about my mistake? Michael was always calm and thoughtful, never one to make a rash decision. The answer came unexpectedly, during one of my conversations with Sarah. We were sitting in a cafe talking about her classes and how her semester was going, when the topic of Michael came up. "Dad's been better, I guess," she said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "But it was really hard for him at first." "I know," I said softly. "I hate what I put him through." Sarah hesitated, biting her lip. "It wasn't just about you, Mom." Her words caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" She sighed, looking conflicted. "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but Dad wasn't completely honest with you either." I stared at her, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" I asked again, more urgently this time. Sarah leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Before he found out about what you did, Dad had been talking to someone too. It didn't go anywhere, but I think it's part of why he was so quick to kick you out. He felt guilty, like he didn't have the moral high ground anymore." The revelation hit me like a wave. I didn't know what to feel: shock, anger, relief? Michael had always seemed so unshakable, so certain of his actions. But now, knowing he had his own guilt to wrestle with, his reaction made more sense. "Does he know you told me this?" I asked, my voice trembling. Sarah shook her head. "No. And I don't think you should bring it up, at least not yet. He's worked really hard to move forward, and I think he's in a better place now. But I thought you deserved to know. I nodded slowly, processing her words. Thank you for telling me. The drive back to Claire's apartment was a blur. My mind raced with questions. Who had Michael been talking to? What would have happened if things had gone differently? And, most importantly, did this change anything about where we stood now? That evening, as I sat alone in the quiet of my borrowed room, I realized that while Michael's actions didn't excuse mine, they did make our story more complicated than I had thought. We were both human, both flawed, and both struggling to navigate a marriage that had fractured long before either of us wanted to admit it. The next day I sent Michael a message. I've been thinking about everything, and I just wanted to say thank you for giving me a chance to rebuild my relationship with the kids, even after everything. I'm still sorry for the pain I caused, but I'm also starting to understand that maybe neither of us was perfect. I hope we can both move forward, even if it's not together. His response came later that night. I appreciate that, Rachel. I think we both needed to hear those words. The kids are starting to come around, and I'm glad they're giving you a chance. Let's keep doing what's best for them. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was closure. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I found a job, rented a small apartment, and continued therapy. My relationship with the kids slowly improved, and while things with Michael remained cordial but distant, I took comfort in knowing that we were both doing our best to heal. Looking back, I realized that the end of my marriage wasn't just about my mistakes. It was about two people who had lost their way and failed to communicate until it was too late. The pain we caused each other would always be a part of our story, but it didn't have to define the rest of our lives. And though the scars would remain, I learned to see them as reminders of the strength it took to keep moving forward.